Here are the Hellbenders, my contact info. If you guys want to email me, I believe I put the email up at the end of the presentation as well. So today we are going to be talking about Hellbenders. And so what I'm going to be doing is doing a brief intro on amphibians and salamanders, which I hope you guys know already. But just in case you don't, I will be going over that. And then I'll also be talking about Hellbenders and some fieldwork that I've done with them, and then what we are doing at the museum. So amphibians, they are ectothermic, which means that they rely on the environment around them to maintain body temperature and things like that. They have slimy skin most of the time, gelatinous eggs, and they lack claws, although sometimes they do. So you'll see a lot of asterisks with a lot of these scientific facts because not anything ever in science is 100% true all the time. We as humans like to define things. Nature just does its own thing to survive. And so basically, the rules sometimes aren't always followed. Amphibians, most of the time, live their lives partly in water and on land, and they are one of the oldest vertebrate classes alive. So there are three orders. So we have the Anura, which are the frogs and toads, which most people are familiar with. Numbers are always changing, but at the time I did this presentation a few weeks ago, there were 7,700 species of frogs and toads across the world. We have salamanders and newts, like this ring salamander down here. At the time, there were 800. And then Sicilians, which most people have not heard of, some people have. A big reason is because they are found in the equatorial regions of the globe. So in Central and South America, equatorial Africa, and then also Southeast Asia. These guys can be fossorial, they can be aquatic. Not a lot is known. They are discovering new species all the time. When I first started doing presentations like this about 12 years ago, there was only 150 known, so they found 50 more species in that time span, which is pretty cool. So salamanders, they are one of my favorite. And as you can see here, there is a big diversity of them, but this is not even the tip of the iceberg. But there are 10 families and around 800 species. So a majority of them, which I believe is on the next slide, are going to be found in Appalachia. So some of my favorites here are the Yanalasi. If you can see my cursor, you have the gray cheek salamander over here. You can get some really cool ones too, like the Jefferson salamander and the blue spotted salamander, and then some California species here. So as you can see, this is the global diversity of salamanders, and the biggest hotspot, so the warmer the color, the more diversity there is. So you can really look at the eastern half of the US is lighting up as it's not across the globe. And then you can see right here in Appalachia, it is just red, red, red. And that just means there is a high, high, high species diversity there. And so I believe in Appalachia alone, it's home to about 15% of the world's species. And then if you go all the way to the salamander mecca, would be Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And there they have about 40 species just in the park. So they're home to, again, a little national park is home to about 8% of the world's species. And then you can see the second hotspot is going to be the Pacific Northwest. And so clearly, right, it's cool and damp in that cool rainforest up there in Washington State, but it is pretty moist in the really northern part of California as well. So there's a ton of salamander biodiversity there. So you can see some of the areas they're lacking. So Australia has no native species of salamanders. Same with Southeast Asia, any of these really hot areas in Africa or even in the United States with these deserts, they're going to lack salamanders. And so, for that reason alone, I say salamanders are as American as apple pie. That was always kind of my tie-in at the zoo when we did an Appalachian salamander exhibit, just to really get people focusing on, hey, even though we don't have pandas and elephants here, we do have salamanders, which is a pretty big deal. So just the United States alone is about a third of all the species on Earth. Putting Central and South America into the mix, that's about two-thirds of the world's species. And then you're pretty much going to have Europe and Asia are going to have the other third. So again, it's a pretty big deal for salamanders around here. So for the most part, Salamanders are going to have a long body, 4 limbs, and clawless toes, but that's not always true. Their size varies. You can get ones as small as an inch, like the pygmy salamander that lives down in Appalachia, or they can be as high as 5 feet. So 5'10", I think, is the largest salamander ever, and that was the Chinese giant salamander. But a majority of them are going to be around 4 to 7 inches. So they can have lungs, gills, or neither. Some do cutaneous respiration, which means breathing through their skin. They are quiet and they can't hear. Some can make noise, and that's when some air can be expelled from their lungs. Like some of the California giant salamanders can make some noise. I think some tiger salamanders and some sirens can as well. But they do have a vestigial middle ear, so they could feel vibrations. And then costal grooves are going to be super, super important for identifying a lot of the salamanders in Appalachia that look very similar. A lot of the plethodon species in that genus Plethodon is basically the costal grooves are going to be corresponding to their trunk vertebra. So around 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way down to 15. So it's the fold or the grooves, as you can see right here at the bottom, in between their legs. And so good luck actually counting that when you have salamanders that are 4 inches in length. But how I kind of do it in the field, I know kind of the range that I'm in and what to expect, and then just to take lots of pictures. So trying to get a ventral view, also a top view, and then a side view as well, where you can see those costal grooves and try and count them. It gets very tricky, but genetics and DNA is the easiest way to do it, but not the easiest when you're out in the field. So feeding strategies are really going to depend on the size of the salamander and what their habitat is like. So when you have ones like this arboreal salamander right here, they have very large jaws to fend off other rival males and things like that, but they can also use that for defense as well. And so that is a pretty massive bite for such a tiny little salamander that's only about 5 to 6 inches. The spring salamander down here, in the northern parts of their range, they eat aquatic invertebrates and insects and things like that. In the southern part of their range, they're going to be eating other salamanders just because that's what kind of food availability is around. And then for hellbenders, they can go after much larger food items. I don't think they're actually going to be eating northern water snakes like depicted in this photo, but they can be pretty territorial and defensive too when they're guarding nests and things like that. This is a pretty cool video. I'm just going to queue it up and hit play. It's from the Hydromantes salamander out in the Sierra Nevadas in California. And the very small plethodon species like the redback salamander have a very similar feeding strategy as well, just to show you guys.
I took control, went solo, and built my own online knife empire.
Just watch this. So, what are they? Maybe not what you'd expect. First up, the Hydromantes salamander from the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. It may not look like the most exciting animal in the world, but just watch this. That was the fastest tongue on Earth. An insect caught and swallowed in less time than I can blink. Only by slowing down the action 40 times can we really see what's going on. That lightning speed comes from these large muscles, which squeeze the tongue out of the mouth, rather like me squeezing a melon pit between my fingers. It's a nice design, but the fastest tongue is no match for the fastest claw.
So that was just kind of a quick tutorial showing how that happens. So obviously larger salamanders aren't able to do that. And some of these smaller species, like the Hydromantes salamander and the redback salamander, they are lungless. And so they just have more room for this apparatus. And it is pretty neat. So when I was working at the National Zoo, we did have redback salamanders and Shenandoah salamanders. And I was able to just kind of record in slow motion with my iPhone, and I could actually see their tongues shooting out as well. So pretty neat. But that's just one of the feeding strategies. So some other facts about salamanders, they're able to fully regenerate limbs, eyes, and even brain tissue, like the axolotl can. Um, they can drop their tails, just like a lot of native species of lizards can, to avoid predation, and they'll regrow their tails. Salamander is Greek for fire lizard, and Leonardo da Vinci, as wise and kind of innovative as he was, again, is also a man of his time. And so a lot of salamanders, like this fire salamander right here, one of the first described salamanders, the scientific name is Salamandra salamandra. So not very creative, I guess, when you think about it, but it was one of the first described animals. And they were found to be crawling out of the fire. Why they were putting rotten logs on the fire, I don't know. But basically, the animals were trying to escape the heat. But what a lot of these early kind of discoverers and scientists thought were these animals are being generated by the fire. So Leonardo da Vinci kind of was quoted saying that the salamander has no digestive organs and solely kind of gets its energy from the fire. Not true. Salamanders do not like it hot. That's why they're found in kind of cooler regions on Earth, and they thrive on moisture. But here are just some kind of depictions of early day salamanders with people trying to drawing it without having any idea what they looked like. Also, a group of salamanders is a congress. I thought that was really cool when I was younger, just because, they kind of meet together, in the evening or at night. The older I got, not as cool, but still a neat way to think of it, like a murder of ravens. It's a congress of salamanders. And then these ones pictured here, the Siberian salamanders can survive deep freezes, very similar to that of the wood frog here in the United States. So they just basically have a glycol in their cells that prevent the cells from rupturing when they freeze, and they can freeze up to about 200 days and can thaw out and walk around like nothing happened afterwards. Also, the biomass, as kind of we were talking about before, in North America is extremely important. They say in true Appalachia, so where people don't have manicured yards where deer can eat hostas and things like that. The biomass in North American forests is actually just from the redback salamander alone is equal to the biomass of white-tailed deer, and that's just one species. Imagine 80 to 90 other species. It's astounding how big the biomass is, more than any vertebrate. I'm sure you guys have heard this analogy before. I use it in every single amphibian talk I do, is canary in the coal mine. So basically the analogy is just saying since these guys are sensitive and spend times both in land and in the water, there's two different, habitats that they're exposed to different stresses. And because they breathe through their skin or at least absorb moisture through their skin, a lot of other things can get absorbed as well. So some of the things that affect amphibians worldwide are climate change with just warming temperatures, habitat loss, whether it's development or timber or coal production, pollution, competition with introduced species, over collecting like this one for the pet trade, and also just emerging diseases as well. So there's a lot of emerging diseases right now. Amphibian chytrid is one of them. Salamander chytrid is another one affecting fire salamanders out in Europe. You could also think about snake fungal disease and ranavirus. Those are other emerging diseases. But specifically for a lot of amphibians, the chytrid right here, it's basically just a fungus, and they'll have the spores will actually seek out amphibians, and the spores will burrow into the moist skin and develop into a fungus, and within 5 days can kind of recolonize itself. And basically, what happens, infected animals like the Panamanian golden frog depicted here, will not be able to succumb to the fungus, and it basically messes up their ability to absorb water, and so it just kind of messes with their whole body system, and then just throws off their electrolytes. So the Panamanian golden frog is actually extinct now in the wild because of chytrid fungus. They're a species found in Panama. They are in zoos and aquariums. I believe there's probably 50,000 in different zoos and aquariums. One day, hopefully, to be re-released. You can treat an animal for chytrid, but you can't really treat the environment for it. So there's all these different studies how they can try and help these guys out, but just one of the many pressures affecting amphibians worldwide. So without further ado, we'll talk about the Eastern Hellbender. So these guys are pretty neat. They are the largest salamander in the United States and the third largest on Earth behind the Japanese and Chinese giant salamanders. So these guys range in about 13 to 15 different states, as you can see with the range map right here. And a big reason why they won't actually be federally listed as well, just because they do cover a lot of states. But as you can see with a lot of these states, they have pretty fragmented ranges. And so even though it looks like they cover a majority of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, they're totally absent from a few water drainages as well. And then even here in Maryland, they're not found in this area in Maryland anymore either. But these guys are pretty neat. They can get up to 2.5 feet, and the largest one weighing over 5 pounds, even though probably about 2 pounds is a fairly large adult in the wild. These guys prefer cool and fast moving streams. These guys, other names for them are called lasagna lizard, Allegheny alligator, things like that. They get lasagna lizard because of these little kind of extra skin, wrinkly skin that they have, flaps on their sides. But basically, because they're not breathing through lungs or gills, they're breathing through their skin. And so, for that reason, they need extra skin to increase their surface area so then they have more skin to absorb oxygen. And they also need cool water because the cooler the water, the higher the oxygen content is. The warmer the water, you'll lose some oxygen. And then fast moving streams just to replenish the oxygen over their skin. So they have lungs, but they don't actually breathe with them. They use them as a swim bladder like fish have to float and sink. So very neat animals. We do have some at the Calvert Marine Museum. Some other facts about them, they can live up to 20 years, 50 years plus in captivity. I would not be surprised if they could live longer. These guys are aerodynamic. Essentially, the currents from the stream will push them down to the bottom, and they have these cornified toe tips and palms, as you can see right here, that prevent them from getting kind of pushed all the way downstream. It's almost like rubber boots that kind of help them grip to the bottom. The males will look after young, so they'll find a den where they will attract several females over, and they'll actually fertilize the eggs and guard them up until the time of them hatching. And so you can see right here, crayfish is the main part of their diet in the wild. You can even see with the teeth right here. So even though they look really derpy, they are pretty voracious predators, and they have those teeth to hold on. They have a pretty strong bite. And yeah, 70% of their diet is crayfish. In captivity, crayfish is probably the least favorite part of their diet. I don't know if it's just because that's what they eat, because that's what's available in the wild. They much prefer earthworms in captivity, and they have a very high olfactory sense. So some of the studies we did at Smithsonian were looking at behavioral aspects of the hellbenders. And so for them, we were looking at their favorite food, which was earthworms. We made a ground up earthworm extract, and we calculated the tanks that they were living in at the time was around probably 20, 30 gallons, which now it's about 125 gallons. But at the time it was only about 30 gallons. And we calculated there's about 50 million drops of water in the tank, and adding 1 drop of ground up earthworm got these guys active looking for their favorite food. So extremely fine-tuned olfactory senses. So we do have hellbenders at the Calvert Marine Museum, the exact same hellbenders that I worked with at the National Zoo, which is pretty cool. So we only went maybe about 6 months without working together in the past 15 years, which is pretty cool. And my old bosses heard that we were looking for hellbenders. We had 18 that I used to take care of at the National Zoo. And they wanted to give us 6, and I said, hell no, that's way too many. If you guys have been to the Calvert Marine Museum, again, it's a museum that happens to have an aquarium department. And so it's just not a huge staff and space for extra exhibits. But I thought this story was too cool to pass up, and these animals are too neat to not to showcase. And so this is their exhibit. So currently we have them in a 125-gallon tank that is chilled. We can get it down into the high or even low 40s in the winter if we want to. So we do cycle them both with temperature, but also with light as well. So they aren't an astronomical timer. So when we have long days in the summer, they have long days as well. The goal is not really to breed them, but if they happen to do that, that would be cool. But mainly it's just to kind of keep them happy and healthy. Another study that we found out at the National Zoo was fluctuating temperatures actually help their immune responses. So figured why not do that as well. And even at 48 degrees, these guys are still super active and eating. So clearly they can get much colder. Because they would slow down a little bit more. So we have Harry and Sally. So Sally is right here at the bottom. She has more of a uniform kind of olivey brown pattern, whereas Harry up here has a more mottled, oops, sorry, I clicked, a more mottled kind of orangey brown, dark brown coloration. So that's how we can tell the difference between the two. I was working with these guys. I first started working with the Hellbenders probably in 2013, and they were probably only 6 inches in length. Now they are around 20, 22 inches in length. Um, so we've been with each other for a long time, probably the longest coworker I've had actually now that I've been at the Marine Museum for about 3 years. So I've been working with these guys for probably 15 years, and my longest coworkers were 12 years. So there we go. So a big thing that we're focusing on with the exhibit is just talking about their former range in the bay. So it is hard to imagine the Chesapeake Bay being freshwater, um, just because everyone's always focused kind of on, the salty, brackish waters that we have. But down here at the mouth of the
For my
Chesapeake Bay, it's going to be full strength seawater, kind of where the Marine Museum is here in Southern Maryland. It's going to be brackish, so around 15 parts per thousand. Down here, full strength is around 30 parts per thousand. Then anything north of Baltimore is going to be fresh water. And so, kind of the orangey areas here are the former range. You can see a little bit closer, zoomed in here, is where they used to be found in the bay. And so, currently, they are called extirpated from the bay, so they're not found in the bay anymore. I was just talking with Bronwyn before this talk, and she was saying they actually have some hellbenders that were collected in the 70s, and those were actually probably the last hellbenders that were seen in any decent numbers. There was a hurricane that came through, I believe, in the mid to late 70s, and pretty much wiped out the remaining ones. A big reason why they vanished is hydroelectric dams, but they do have a lot of pressures. So here is the Conowingo Dam right here. And between on so between right here where the Conowingo is, and then I guess if this map continued, Harrisburg would be up here. There is 4 hydroelectric dams. So basically, hellbenders going through this would not survive. They either be blocked off or they be ground up. And so the damming kind of prevents the flow of new genetics down the Susquehanna. And then what is left in these tributaries afterwards are going to be kind of pressures from humans, whether it's agriculture and whether it's fertilizers or waste, kind of being wiped into the streams, causing algal blooms, fishing. So we have the brown trout right here, which is stocked. It's a non-native species that prey on hellbenders. Siltation from urbanization. If you see Baltimore and the suburbs of Baltimore is really close to their former range. So any siltation clogs up the waterways, and it makes it harder for the younger hellbenders to survive and thrive. Climate change as well is a huge factor now. So even if all these things weren't there, I personally believe it'd be way too warm for hellbenders to actually survive in any of their former tributaries and streams of their former range right here. And also emerging diseases. Hellbenders can get chytrid. They can also cure themselves of chytrid with warmer water. But then again, as you guys have learned, they also do not like warmer water just because it stresses them out because they're not able to breathe as much. So basically, it's a perfect storm. And so that's one thing that we are focusing on with the exhibit. We are still waiting on signs to kind of get published. It's our busy season right now with concerts and things like that at the Marine Museum. So hopefully towards the end of summer, we'll get these signs up. So the exhibit's been open for about a year and a half now. And mainly what I would like, if people aren't available to educate folks about hellbenders, folks can kind of research on their own. just looking at the maps without sounding too preachy, but just kind of letting people know, like, hey, this is what has happened. And yeah, hellbenders just don't exist, at least in Eastern Maryland anymore. But they are found still in Western Maryland. So what can we do? Don't stack the rocks. I have trained a lot of my non-biology friends not to do this. So as you can see right here, it's just eliminating habitat for hellbenders, but it's also eliminating habitat for other species of salamanders and other invertebrates and things like that. So basically just kind of leave the habitat as you found it, leave only footprints. eDNA studies are another way to see if hellbenders do exist in any parts of their former range. Kim Terrell, she was the PhD postdoc that was doing a lot of the studies with us at Smithsonian. She did do a eDNA study, which is environmental DNA. So just taking a sample of water, you can kind of compare it with a sample of hellbender DNA that is from their skin sloughing off, and you can see if hellbenders exist in any of these former streams. And she found that they are not. And so they definitely are not in Eastern Maryland anymore. You can create artificial nest boxes, which is what the St. Louis Zoo did, and that's a video I'm going to share with you guys. You can also do head starting and captive breeding. Again, I don't think there's any benefit for the hellbenders in Eastern Maryland to do this, just because there's not any habitat left for them. But in other areas of their range, there definitely is, and that's what a lot of zoos and aquariums are working with the local DNR departments to try and make this happen. So I'm going to show you this cool video of little baby hellbenders. So pretty cool. And here's some fieldwork that I was lucky enough to do with Hellbenders. So not to brag that I saw Hellbenders too. But this was in southwestern Virginia with Kim Terrell, who was doing the studies at Smithsonian, and with now they're called the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. And this was a known area for Hellbenders in Tazewell County. Um, but as you can kind of see behind me in this one picture right here, that this stream is silted. And so there was a lot of agriculture, and so there's just a lot of runoff for that. We did have a bunch of people kind of wondering, what are all these people doing in the stream, close to the farm? So we had people kind of out and just asking what we were doing. And, just explaining, hey, if you plant, a buffer and just let some of the plants grow, it'll actually prevent a lot of this siltation. And then you can find some of these animals down here. And so for them, they were like, oh, well, yeah, we don't plant up to the edge anyways. And so just little interactions like that, talking with the public, being able to kind of let them know what's here. It didn't look like any different stream that we would find in Maryland, but this one just happened to have hellbenders in it. And so that was just really cool. So we did end up finding three very large hellbenders. They were all around 2 feet, about 60 centimeters. And this is the only shot from the hellbender that was not trying to bite me. So again, they have pretty powerful bites. But I got this nice shot right here with my Hellbender Brewery shirt, which I actually did just find out they ended up, I believe, closing after about 10 years. But they were a really cool brewery in, I believe, Southeast DC, around the Fort Totten Metro. They helped us fundraise and stuff like that. So very appropriate, right, to wear my Hellbender shirt while I was doing fieldwork with Hellbenders. But yeah, so because it was very heavily silted, we only found these three large individuals and no young ones at all. So just when it's silted, the babies can't breathe, and it just clogs up small hiding spots for them as well in between rocks and under rocks. that only the really large ones under large rocks can survive. So hopefully, changing a few things about the area around it. There wasn't high erosion or anything like that. There were pretty shallow banks. So just kind of creating a buffer will really, really help. I also got to do some field work when I was at the National Zoo in Japan. So here is a picture of me with their very close relative, the Japanese giant salamander. I went out and we found, I believe, four of them that evening, which was pretty cool. So if you go out at night, that's when they are active. And you could see that very similar, just like we did with the Hellbenders, we are measuring this one, weighing this one, and then over here, we're taking a genetic sample. So there is one that we did a pit tag reading on and was not one that had been discovered yet. And they've been doing the study for about 20 years. And this animal that you see right here is roughly 20 years old. So it went undetected all this time. So they're doing a clipping just to see how it's related to other Japanese giant salamanders in the area. But then also in Japan, they are having trouble with introduced species. And so the Chinese giant salamander has been introduced in some areas in Japan and hybridizes and makes an even larger salamander than the Chinese giant salamander and a much more aggressive species. So they are trying to make sure that any of these animals are not hybrids either. In Hiroshima, where this was with the Asa Zoo in Japan, I believe there's no detections of it's the very northern parts of the range where there are kind of the hybridizations going on. But again, very similar field work that we were doing with the Hellbender. They're doing the exact same stuff with the Japanese giant salamanders out in Japan. And here at the Asa Zoo is so the whole reason why I went was to try and see how we can improve the breeding program at the National Zoo. And so at the Asa Zoo, they basically supply the world of Japanese giant salamanders. So they really have not been bred in captivity yet, other than at the Asa Zoo. And one of the things that I noticed at the Asa Zoo, it was an open system. So that means that they're bringing in water out from the environment and then pumping it through their system so they can get, the different fluctuations. They're outside, so they can get the different fluctuations in temperature, as well as any kind of particulates that are coming through the waterway to encourage them to breed. Clearly, we weren't going to be doing that at the National Zoo, just because Rock Creek Park is right there, where raw sewage goes in. So we would probably end up with no Japanese giant salamanders. But also just to try and see how they did any outreach and things like that was kind of all took into account. But that's a whole nother presentation that I would be happy to give to you guys one day. But yeah, seeing some very large and also small Japanese giant salamanders was really cool. And they actually did have one confiscated Chinese giant salamander. So that was not on my bucket list. Obviously, not a wild animal. But it was still very, very neat. You could see its head was the size of my head. So that was just insane to see. This animal, I think, was about 4.5, 5 feet long. So it was a, a gargantuan animal. So what is the museum doing? So all this talk, don't want you guys to get upset that, what's going on, the world's ending, things like that. So we definitely do have our exhibit on Hellbenders, and we are educating folks about the plight of Hellbenders. So kind of like I mentioned before, we always kind of, say this might happen if we don't act now. Well, you know what? Hellbenders have actually been wiped out in Eastern Maryland. So let's talk about that and learn from it. We're also doing some citizen science programs like FrogWatch, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We also have some native plant gardens that we've installed since I've started on campus, as well as a frog pond that we did with the Eagle Scout group. And we also got a Chesapeake Bay Trust grant to get some acoustic recorders. That is a current project I'm working on that I'll also be talking about. So FrogWatch is a citizen science program. The National Zoo chapter started in 2013, kind of when I started with the Reptile Discovery Center. And it's basically at the time was AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums flagship citizen science program, but basically training folks to go out and listen to frog calls, just normal people, not scientists, and seeing what's out there. Since moving down to Southern Maryland, the interest and retention of volunteers exploded. So we would average about maybe 300 observations a season to now last year we had 1,100 observations submitted, which is incredible. A big reason is just because we have a lot more land in Southern Maryland than you have in DC. We also got some parks to kind of tag along, like Huntley Meadows and Alexandria. to have a few sites to have volunteers go out and look for species. Even where I live in Southern Maryland around Prince Frederick, I have one pond that has 5 species calling at once. So that counts as 5 observations. So pretty neat. We also have some state endangered species that we are hoping to uncover, but you'll see that in the next few slides. The native plant gardens we got just to kind of beautify the campus when I realized we can't really, it's a small department and we can't keep opening new exhibits like the Hellbenders and the axolotls that we have and the spotted turtles. We ended up going outside. And so just kind of beautifying the museum grounds, but also trying to use native plants to then really get people to focus on planting native and how it benefits the animals and wildlife around them. And we also worked with the Eagle Scout group right here to do a frog pond. And so you can see here are just some animals visiting. A little green frog here. And then here is what we did to kind of zhuzh up the frog pond that got put in last year. This spring, we try to make it kind of a little bit more of a destination for people to kind of sit out and kind of observe the frogs on their own. And we also installed some acoustic recorders there just so folks can kind of learn about some of the science programs that we are doing um, all across Southern Maryland. So the Chesapeake Bay Trust grant, it kind of started, I am affiliated with the Virginia Herpetological Society as well. I've been with them for probably 12 years and then doing leading surveys with them for the past 10. I'm a former president. I'm on the executive committee still. And one of the things is we do these surveys that just kind of are one day in length, but if we have some species that are potentially going to be found in a certain county, there's no way to really see that they're there if we are only surveying one day. And then I also thought, hey, this might be really cool to try and track some of these endangered, state endangered species in Southern Maryland. So we got 6 of these acoustic recorders right here that record um, anything, really, some conversations at the Marine Museum, but I'm not trying to listen to that. I'm only listening for frogs. So it's kind of interesting, kind of what pops up like on college campuses and stuff like that. But basically, I'm going to skip right over here to the locations that we have them at. Um, so we have these 6 locations, 2 in Charles County, 2 in Calvert, and 2 in St. Mary's County in Southern Maryland. Mainly to kind of focus with here with the Career and Technology Center in Leonardtown and with St. Mary's College of Maryland to kind of educate the next generation with, field techniques and stuff like that. But also these were chosen for specifically where there could be additional populations of state endangered species like the carpenter frog up top and the eastern narrowmouth toad below. As I'm going through some of the calls now, because the grant is due in September, I'm trying to just get a head start on the 20,000 sound files I have right now and in training the software to listen for certain species. Um, it sometimes thinks college kids that hang out by it's a party area, I think, where one of the vernal pools is. So they think sometimes college kids are wood frogs, which yeah, having to go through some of these files. I'll probably find new sites next year, but we can still kind of be associated with the college. But yeah, so that's also kind of us out in the field with some of these college students, finding other species like four-toed salamanders that utilize these vernal pools, as well as spotted salamander egg masses. Obviously, getting teenagers to go out into the water is no problem whatsoever. So it's just kind of neat to see. I'm starting to pour through some of the data right now. I've already found Eastern spadefoot at each site, which is pretty cool. I didn't think they'd be that prevalent, but so far they've been found at every site that we've deployed these acoustic recorders. And I just pulled some data on Tuesday, so I'm hoping that we're getting some of these rare summer callers like the Eastern narrowmouth toad or the carpenter frog, so fingers crossed. So what's next? I don't know. There is a lot that we can potentially find. So right now we are pairing with the American Chestnut Land Trust, with Maryland Department of Natural Resources, St. Mary's College of Maryland, the Nanjemoy Creek Environmental Education Center, Master Naturalist Groups, the Chesapeake Biological Lab, University of Maryland, the Virginia Herpetological Society, and Chestpacks. So again, there is just a lot of different ways that we can collaborate. Just with Chestpacks, we work heavily with them at the Calvert Marine Museum. One of the gentlemen there said, "Hey, I was working with the Maryland Amphibian and Reptile Atlas project, and we have some extra acoustic recorders if you want to use them. So now we have actually deployed two at Pax River to do some studies down there to try and find eastern narrowmouth toads. We have another one deployed in Charles County that we're working with the state. It's a kind of satellite new acquisition of the Myrtle Grove Wildlife Management Area. And then also one of those has gone down to King George, Virginia, where we just did a herpetological survey as well. So again, I love to collaborate. Here are some rare species found in southern Maryland, like the eastern tiger salamander, the rainbow snake, and the eastern narrowmouth toad. So who knows what we can find? I love to collaborate. So if anyone has any ideas, I'd be love to chat with you guys, and that really opens it up to you guys now.
Matt, thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yes,
We
you're
have
welcome.
we have some questions coming into the chat box. Remember, if you want to ask directly to Matt, raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Awesome.
Couple of let me just go back here. That was that. Steve asks, is there gene flow among hellbenders in different watersheds, or are the populations genetically distinct in each watershed?
So they definitely can be distinct for sure. So there again is across a bunch of areas. So I think for a lot of these head starting programs, they are looking at reintroducing hellbenders into kind of areas of their former range, but that's also going to be kind of areas where they might need a little bit of more genetic diversity. And so that's what the eDNA can also help with, or a lot of these studies where they're taking genetic samples is just to try and see what the level of relatedness is, because again, when a lot of these animals are getting less and less animals in there, the stock is getting lower and lower. So the factor of inbreeding can definitely occur. There are genetically distinct ones as well. If I go back to the range map, you could, let me run back really quick. Share. Actually, I'm gonna probably get the video, so let me just scroll back. So if we look at areas of their former range, so like former range right here, but you can also see in Missouri and Arkansas, you get the Ozark hellbender, so that's a genetically distinct one. And I believe that one, I don't know if this specific subspecies has federal protection though. Um, but yeah, they are finding out that even though it looks great for a lot of the states, just because their range covers the whole state, it's really not. And there is a lot of issues worrying about inbreeding and just not enough animals there to breed with other animals.
Well, Steve has another genetic question. What
Okay.
genetic and morphological and environmental adaptations have developed in hellbenders and large salamander species in China and Japan to let them grow so big? Why do they get so big?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks say that they are just a kind of more of a more ancient lineage of salamanders where they get so big. Because when you think about it, everything used to be humongous back in the day, right? When there was more oxygen on Earth. So being in the water, I think that's one way they can get much larger. So there are large species of salamanders in the United States, maybe not larger than hellbenders, but can get pretty big, like amphiumas and mud puppies and water dogs. And so a lot of those animals get big, and sirens too. Um, because they're in the water, so they're kind of relying on kind of cooler water that way to breathe. Some of them have external gills, like the sirens and the mud puppies and the water dogs, so they can take warmer waters to breathe through gills that way too. I think water just helps get larger animals. When I was in Japan, there was the Hanzaki Center, which was in Yubara Springs, so I think about 2 or 3 hours north of Hiroshima. It was a pretty big area there where they had some museums focused on them, and they actually used to have they have historical records, fossil records of giant salamander, hellbender-like animals in Europe as well, just not found anymore. So yeah, pretty neat stuff.
All right. Well, the name is Jocelyn Hope, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Uh, I think you talked about land salamanders as well, I think.
Yep.
Okay, so someone I know in my court has a whole like bounty of them, like under their like cement gutter thing, like that. So yeah, me and my friend asked them. So yeah, and the mom said yes, and so we got to hold one.
That's awesome.
Actually got to hold one, and some of them were like this big.
Were they, so my guess is they could probably be redback salamanders. So I grew up in Arlington County, and I would find those guys in my yard, in my little postage stamp size yard. Um, so those are probably one of the most common salamanders on the East Coast. And you can get the redback form that's kind of reddish orange, but you can also get some that have more of a lead back or kind of black looking salamander. But yeah, most of them are about, 4 to 7 inches. They're pretty
Yeah,
skinny as well. And those guys, believe it or not, do not have lungs at all. They breathe solely through their skin. So it's pretty neat.
including we live in Carroll County, so yeah, we have lots of them in our driveway.
That's awesome. I love to hear
Including there
that.
was one time there was a toad on my stair.
Oh, that's amazing. Sounds like you
Mom
have a
thought
wonderful yard.
Mom thought it was a rock. But then it moved, and then Mom was like,
That's awesome.
"Thank you."
Hey, Matt, could you give us some tips about if you are in the wild and herping and you might, roll a log and see a salamander that you want to pick up? What's a good way to handle them? Or should we? I mean, it's fun and great to do that. Should we have our hands wet or something like that? Can you give us?
Yeah, I would say make sure your hands are moist. Whenever I'm leading these herpetological surveys and stuff like that, I always say roll the log towards you. So whatever is open is facing away, just because you never know what's under the log. If you know it's a venomous snake, you at least have the log there to kind of protect you a little bit. Um, Not that I'm advocating not to wear bug spray or sunscreen. I personally don't when I'm hiking in the woods because I know I'm going to be finding salamanders, so that will get absorbed in their skin and hurt them. So I don't want that. So just make sure you don't have, anything, lotions, things like that on your skin, or if you do, just kind of wash it off your hands. Um, Always put the log back how you found it is also really important too. So even if you don't find any animals under there, that doesn't mean the salamander might not call it home that evening, or their food definitely calls it home. So that's just another kind of etiquette. Leave only footprints, I say, when you're ever out in the field.
All right. I'm going to come back to you, Alan, in a second. Cody put in there, where do the hellbenders and giant salamanders fit phylogenetically among other salamanders? And do we know roughly when the hellbenders split from the other giant salamanders?
That one I don't know. But kind of going not specifically hellbenders, but the reason why you get a lot of these kind of similar looking species that are in other parts of the globe. So back when we were Pangea, a lot of the salamander life emanated from Appalachia. And so when all the continents were together, that's kind of where the salamander life started. And then as all the continents broke up, that's why you have a lot of very similar species. Like we have a lot of Italian cave salamanders that are very closely related to some Appalachian species and even some California species. Um, but we also have, some of the giant salamanders as well. We even have some kind of weird plethodonid species they've just discovered in the past 10, 15 years in Korea, that are very similar to a lot of the plethodon species that we have in Appalachia. So, I mean, I'm not sure when they actually kind of broke off. I did go to a Hellbender talk one time where that was kind of his specialty. Genetics, I wish was my specialty, but it's really not. But I could find more information for you if you're interested and want to email me for sure.
Well, and there's a follow-up question about the fossil record and in salamanders or hellbenders in particular. Cody says there's a record of them in Europe. and you were at the Calvert Marine Museum. Do we
Yep.
have any fossilized salamanders or hellbenders down in the record?
Actually, Ralph Eshelman and Stephen Godfrey just did an article about fossilized hellbenders being found in the Potomac, which that's not something that I mean, again, it's not in the recent fossil record, but that's something that's pretty substantial because they've never known, at least in modern times, to be in that fossil record. Um, but other than that, I know they have not found any amphibian fossils at all, at least yet when I was talking with Steven, um, that they found in Maryland of any amphibians. But I mean, kind of our specialty with fossils at the Calvert Marine Museum obviously is going to be the megalodon teeth that everyone talks about. But yeah, Stephen Godfrey, I mean, they are finding new species of whale and dolphin like every 3 months. So it's just kind of crazy that they're like, hey, this is one that's not been described before. So it seems to be a really cetacean rich type of environment in the Calvert Cliffs, Potomac, Chesapeake area.
Well, it looks like we're going to have to get Ralph and Stephen to do a presentation on fossilized hellbenders for the
Sorry,
Potomac.
Ralph. I know Ralph would love to do it though.
Yeah, yeah. Alan, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Thanks, Bronwyn, and thanks, Matt. I have a
Yes.
standard question that I ask everybody, and you can answer that second, but that standard question is just how you got into this. Where did that interest come from? You know, whether when you were a child or through your education, be interested in knowing. And then before you get to that, I don't know if this is only in my mind, but when you mentioned looking at them in Hiroshima, I was wondering any mutations, things like that. Did any of that come up in conversation, or have they looked at that from the blast in 45?
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, I mean, even though a lot of the city was focused on that, and I have seen a pretty cool picture in one of the Facebook groups that's since gone viral of actually um, a Japanese giant salamander in that stream that kind of overlooks that one big. They made it a memorial, but it's kind of like that one big building that's still kind of skeletonized from the blast. So they definitely do live around there. I've not heard anything with radiation and how it affected them um, at all, but that'd be very interesting. I mean, I could certainly, if you want to email me, I could even look up because I'd be really curious to know if, as well, if anything was related to that. But then to your first question, kind of as the legend goes, I've told the story so many times, is that basically when I was 5 years old, my dad took me out kind of behind his work where he heard some frogs calling. So even though I'm from Arlington County, right, concrete jungle, even more so than it was when I grew up. My dad grew up in Charles County, so Southern Maryland, very rural, and he was like a kid of like, the 60s and 70s, where, you just kind of are gone all day hiking and bringing animals home, and that's just how it was. And so when he saw that I had an interest, he kind of ran with it and was living vicariously through that. So even though he was a zoology major, he ended up getting his MBA and kind of going the more financial route, I guess where the money is, right? But when he saw that I had an interest, he really kind of was living vicariously through that. And we would always be out hiking every chance we could get. My uncle Kenny still lives in Charles County in Southern Maryland, has 19 acres, and I would beg, beg, beg to go hiking as much as I could. And then by the time I got to high school, I kind of realized, hey, this might not just be a hobby and could probably be a career path. And so I majored in environmental biology. I got my start at a nature center when I was in college, and kind of when I graduated, got a full-time job with benefits at the zoo before the nature center. So that's kind of the route I went there. I always knew something with animals. I always loved reptiles and amphibians. And yeah, probably it was when I kind of got my dream job of working at the National Zoo. I started doing more field work just because that's kind of how I got started, and I love being outside and kind of seeing the animals you're taking care of thriving in the wild. And so, yeah, that's why I try and do a lot of stuff with students now as well, because even though now I've been graduated for probably 15, 16 years now. I remember how hard it was to kind of break into the field. So anytime I can give advice or inspiration and things like that, it's a very big field. I love to do public speaking. I love to do kind of research in the wild. I love animal care. So one of my coworkers, at the zoo. She never said it to me, but she did say, like, Matt's just a crazy guy. I guess he just loves talking to people, but he's really good at animal care too. And usually you don't have either or. So that did mean a lot, even though she didn't say it directly to me. But I do like all of it, but I do understand people like to kind of fine tune what they're interested in. So if I can kind of help the next generation, I try and do that wherever I can.
Great. Thanks so much. Bronwyn seems to find people with passion every Thursday. It's great. And it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. You mentioned that 70% of the in the wild, the diet for hellbenders is crayfish,
Yep.
and we do have the invasive crayfish because we did had a crayfish of Maryland talk, which you can find on our YouTube channel. But is the invasive? Do they find? Is there a preference? Do they like? Does it matter if it's if it's a native or non-native crayfish? It doesn't matter. They just eat them all.
Yeah, I think they just eat them all, right? In the wild, you just grab what you can. I think the invasive, well, I did also see these actually came from the museum store at the Calvert Marine Museum. So if you guys want to visit and buy something similar as that, we have the artist that did these. I mean, I think they are mass produced, so I'm not going to act like, painstakingly like cut out. So they're actually kind of like a collage um, made with like different layers and stuff like that. So it actually has like a 3D effect. But since moving to Southern Maryland, I have kind of a coastal theme in my living room. So when I saw that they had that at a very competitive price, yeah, I did decide to buy it. But yeah, so that was just I saw that question pop up. But with the crayfish, I would think the larger introduced species have the potential to kind of fight back with the hellbender. But at the same time, too, you can get some fairly large hellbenders that I think they'll just grab whatever they can. So as far as I know, there's probably not a preference. Um, but I mean, certainly if they have to put up more of a fight, they might avoid that species of crayfish.
I have another question, and I can ask because I'm a moderator here. You mentioned cornified toes, and I had never heard
Yes.
that before. Could you just explain again what a cornified toe is?
Yeah, and I can even share my screen again. It's funny because that slide was actually just up when you asked that. Let me just hit share. And so these quantified toe tips, it's kind of like keratinized a little bit, but not as hard as you would think like the material is with your fingernail. And a lot of other salamander species, I've noticed it in others that are kind of more stream dwelling, like some Desmognathus species will have these as well, and that's how you can identify some from the other. But basically, it's just kind of an extra layer of skin. I'm sure there's a special term for it other than cornified or keratinized, but basically it just kind of develops this pad that I wouldn't say it's sticky, but it just has a lot of tension. And so they just don't get swept downstream. So it acts like a rubber boot. Um, but yeah, just kind of a neat adaptation that they have. But some other stream dwelling salamanders have that as well.
Okay. Rachel asked, "What's the largest hellbender ever found?"
The record, I believe, is 29 inches. I don't know if that's in captivity or in the wild. My guess would be captivity. But even then, like we saw ones that were just slightly over 2 feet. Um, so 2 feet, 24 inches is pretty standard. Um, yeah, but 29 inches is the record. I'm just not quite sure if that's captivity or in the wild.
Okay. You also mentioned a threat for salamanders in general from the pet trade. Do you have any more information on that?
Yeah, so not local species right now, but I would say like this one that I had right here. Let me share my screen again. Just trying to queue it up. So this one right here is the Luristan newt. So this is native to Iran and Iraq and was formerly critically endangered, if not extinct from the wild, because they are so brightly colored and they were worried about the pet trade. There have been new populations found. So of course you think Iraq and Iran, there's what? There's newts that live in the desert over there. So these guys are basically living in the mountains in streams. And so I think At some points of the year, they can come out into the open when these streams flood, and they'll breed. But basically, they're kind of living sometimes even underground, in these karsts and things like that. But just because they are very brightly colored. Since then, though, I believe I'm trying to remember the name of the zoo now. Oh man. It's one that's out in the Midwest. It's just skipping my mind right now, and I even have some friends that work there. But they basically kind of bought up some of these species that were in the pet trade and kind of flooded the market with them. So a lot of zoos and aquariums aren't really allowed to sell. Sedgwick County Zoo, that's who it was. And they basically flooded the market with these animals and made it really cheap. So then it's just like, well, there's no point to import them anymore when you could just captive breed them in the United States. Um, so that's always a worry too, because I mean, when you have people that want to pay top dollar, the black market pet trade's always a worry. I wouldn't say it's the biggest threat though.
And how are there legitimate pet traders that are selling? I mean, if people wanted to have a pet salamander, and are hellbenders make good pets, or are there other ones, or what do you
Yeah,
recommend?
so I would always say I actually breed newts at home. What else don't I do? But basically, I don't really work with any native species at home, just because then you have to worry about permits and regulations and things like that. Hellbenders are protected, so no one can actually legally own hellbenders. Plus, it's just too expensive. You need a huge tank, you need a crazy system, you need a chiller, and the chiller alone is like $1,800. So yeah, it's a setup that zoos and aquariums are definitely set up to do, and we have the proper permits and things like that. There are people like me or other people that you can meet through like online forums or Facebook groups and stuff like that. If you're a child, make sure you have your parents around with you or permission. But basically, to captive breed salamander, probably have like about 10 species at home. They're all Asian or European. So they're all ones that have been kind of in the United States for a couple of decades and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I have a lot. But there are captive bred ones. I don't even think you can import salamanders anymore into the United States because they are worried about chytrid and B-sal and stuff like that. So everything that's pretty much in the States is legitimate as long as it's like not a native species of salamander.
Gotcha. And Cody asks, give recommendations for universities to study reptiles and amphibians when they get out of the Army, wants to go into paleoherpetology, which sounds fascinating.
Wow. That sounds really good. I mean, I don't know any department that specializes on that. Um, Honestly, I think it really just depends on what professors are around there. Because when I was initially looking at schools, I did end up going to school in New York, but when I was initially looking at like Virginia schools, James Madison University, sounded really cool, but I didn't really know about any programs that they did. But then when I was I met, so there used to be this group called Herp Happy Hour, that was in DC with Smithsonian, with the zoo, with natural history, I think the University of Maryland and other universities. And so I met this guy named David McLeod who was working at James Madison University. He recently got a new job somewhere else. So I'm not sure which university he's at now. But with one of my colleagues, we would go and just kind of educate some of the college students just about, I think there was internships that we did in conjunction with James Madison University, but we were also doing things as well just to kind of, help the next generation. And James Madison had like a department of like 8 herpetologists, which was insane. So I just think it happened to be the interest of the bio department at the time. Um, I know University of Maryland with Dick Heighton back in the day. I mean, I know Karen Lips do a lot of kind of amphibian reptile work. So it really just depends on, I think, the certain professors. I don't know if there's a way to figure that out easier. Um, Joining groups like this is definitely a great way to network and find that out. Also, Virginia Herpetological Society, I'll kind of give them a plug as well. They do have fall meetings, I believe, usually in October. And so that's another organization to check out and network. There's a lot of folks that are from different universities that are professors that are affiliated with the society, as well as people that work for different conservation organizations, zoos and aquariums, regulatory, like Department of Natural Resources and things like that. So checking out any kind of conferences or natural history things like that, like this group as well. I think that's always a great way to network and hopefully find out any kind of interest that way.
West Virginia Herpetological Society is also a good one,
A
and they
good
have
one.
open conferences as well that you can go to.
Very good.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Matt tonight on hellbenders or salamanders or frogs? We're going to definitely have Matt back. So be on the lookout for that. We'll have to come
And I
back and
will
talk
be
about
reaching back out to you, Bronwyn, around the beginning of the new year when I'm starting to plan FrogWatch, just because I like starting folks in the beginning of the season because it goes from February 1st, even though this year they weren't really calling until like mid-March. It was so cold. Um, yeah, I think we had wood frogs not even calling in February, which is crazy. Um, but yeah, we have lots of sites. I'm trying to get kind of more folks at kind of the top of the bay or even on the Eastern Shore if anyone's interested. But obviously, the more sites, the more things that we will find. Yeah, so FrogWatch, I'll enunciate a little bit better. um, yeah, I guess it is dinner time, right? And but yeah, I think to kind of see what's out there, I think is great. And yeah, so I'll be reaching out about that. So you might see my name again pop up, but I'm happy to give talks. I'm happy to collaborate, things like that. So, and yeah, if you come on down, let me know. Hopefully, I run into you and I can kind of give you more in depth for some of the animals that we have there.
Cody asks again, going to Japan, you have any advice on people that they can hook up with for volunteering with the programs or seeing the giant salamanders or getting involved over there?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so Yuri, oh gosh, I forget his last name, but I probably would butcher it anyways. He used to work at the Asa Zoo, and I know he doesn't anymore. So I'm sure they're still involved in the program, but he was very integral to really kind of getting that implemented worldwide. But I would reach out to the Asa Zoo and kind of check them out. The zoo was a little dated, to be honest. But basically, I kind of went out with the Asa Zoo. So the weird thing is, even though the Japanese giant salamander is designated a national treasure of Japan, they don't have a regulatory body like Fish and Wildlife, like the United States does. And so, kind of a big reason to really show the government, hey, we're doing cool things, is actually networking with other zoos and showing them around. So, like, I actually even met when I visited with like the director of the zoo because it was a big deal to have someone, from Smithsonian or from the United States to kind of come out and see what they were doing. So that was really cool. So being kind of affiliated with that zoo and reaching out that way. I would also look at a lot of organizations online, like Facebook groups and stuff like that, because people are around all around the world, and some people are protective over their sites and stuff like that, but you never know. People might be able to share info. You can kind of meet up with other folks as well, which I think is always great.
And you have Matt's email now, so you can get in contact with him and
Yes,
directly.
any question, I'm more than happy to help people out with, whether it's careers or, I don't know, get involved in herpetological things. I'm always happy to.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt, for coming and sharing with us. Hopefully, we'll get down to the Calvert Marine Museum
You're welcome
very soon.
anytime, please.
And
Lower is what we call it down there. So
yeah, lower. And then next week we have wetland plants back here for Must Learn Thursday, so we'll learn all about those fascinating adaptations. And in the meantime, stay well, stay curious, stay outside, keep looking for those salamanders, and maybe you'll find a hellbender too. Take care, everybody.
All right. Thanks again, Bronwyn. Thanks, Matt.